You're listening to the 2019 Nelson Arts Festival Page and Blackmore Pukapuka Talks. This session features Elizabeth Knox in conversation with Jacquetta Bell.
Hello everyone, welcome. This is Kerry Sunderland, who's the actual organiser of all these fabulous events. I'm Jacquetta Bell. I'm here today to talk to Elizabeth Knox. The two gigs that I went to yesterday, someone's phone went off, so don't just think you turned it off, please have a check. And since you're all literate people that can read signs, I won't bother telling you about the toilets, but I think the assembly point for earthquakes is out there, but this building must have stood up through quite a few of that sort of event. Is that it, Kerry, or do I need to tell them anything else? I'll thank Page and Blackmore very much for sponsoring us for years and years, and now with the new name Pukapuka Talks, which is really lovely. There's going to be a podcast, so when we if I manage to get through this fabulous book and all the questions I've got, we will let you have a turn, and there'll be a roving mic, and you're to treat it like an ice cream. Don't lick it, but hold it up close. So yesterday when Guy on Espina introduced Witi Ihimara, he did it all beautifully in Te Reo, as you would expect, but when he translated, he'd called him the Supreme Commander of New Zealand literature. But I think there's need for gender balance, and I'm sure you can have two Supreme Commanders. So I think we're in the having read the book.
I'd like to be the first officer, actually. Sort of the brainy one who gets the captain out of problems.
Oh, fair enough. We're undoubtedly in the presence of genius, anyway. So sit back and enjoy this. Elizabeth was made an ONZM in 2002, and earlier this month she won the Prime Minister's Award for Literary Achievement in Fiction. She's the author of 13 novels and 3 novellas in genres ranging from autobiographical fiction to fantasy. She's received the Arts Foundation's Laureate Award. Her book, The Vintner's Luck, won the Deutz Medal for Fiction, the Reader's Choice and Bookseller's Choice Awards in the 1999 Montana New Zealand Book Awards, and the Tasmanian Pacific Region Prize in 2001. I'm not going to go into all the awards because there's numerous, but just add on that The Vintner's Luck's been published in 10 languages. So her adult novels include Wake and the new one, The Absolute Book, which was published just in September. And in 2014, Elizabeth was the recipient of Creative New Zealand's Michael King Writers' Fellowship. But I just want to flip back to the most recent and prestigious award. Would you call it the most prestigious? The Prime Minister's Award for Literary Achievement in Fiction?
It's one of the beauties of that award is that it's not you don't apply, you get nominated. So it kind of comes out of the blue, and you don't feel that you have to justify yourself in any way, and you're almost not involved in the process until it happens, and then you just find a nice outfit. And
was it a phone call? Did you just get a phone call?
Yes, I got
out
a phone
of the blue?
call. Yes.
And what were you doing at that time?
I actually got a phone call that I had missed, and then got a message from the person, and I thought to myself, I think this will be the Prime Minister's Award. And then I rang back and it was, which was just, I suppose my sense of timing was the same as their sense of timing. So isn't that nice? And I was really, really glad to get it from the right Prime Minister.
Oh, yeah. So Elizabeth, I read on your Facebook page, I think, that in your acceptance speech you worked the humble weka into your speech. Humble weka. People in the audience who've torn themselves away from the garden to be here might call them the annoying weka.
I don't think they think of themselves as humble. I was writing my speech while teaching a world-building course out at Appleby that I've done the past 2 years, also organised by Kerry. It's great fun. But it's really full on, and I hadn't written my speech, and I was really kind of out of my mind with tiredness and hip pain and various other annoying things. And I sent this text to Fergus, my husband, saying that I was trying to write my speech, but a weka had run away with it, and he said, "You're obviously delirious, go to sleep." But yeah, weka did run away with my speech. I suddenly found a way of tying everything together with a story about a weka who stole my mother's stones. My mother used to go around collecting stones and bringing them back to put in the garden. So she and Dad would go off on a holiday and she'd come back with stones, but this weka had run off with all her stones overnight.
So it wasn't just the weka, you managed to reference your parents, which was something you also wanted to do.
Yeah, because my parents are dead and I wanted them to get them into the room, so I put them in the speech as characters with the weka. Yeah.
So if we rock into the book, 650 pages, I have to say I was a bit daunted when it arrived, but I was also gutted when it ended. So it's, it's a fabulous, fabulous read. I just wanted to say, it's like it's epic, it's literary, it's fantasy. If you had to sort of slot a title on it, what would you say?
Well, I write literary fantasy, which are a number of other people doing, like Philip Gaiman or David Mitchell or so on. And we come from different ends, and the people who come from the literary fiction end and then write some literary fantasy get taken terribly seriously and reviewed in the TLS, and the people who come from the other side, so like people like Neil Gaiman and me sort of have come slightly from the other side, and people like David Mitchell and Margaret Atwood with the science fiction come from the literary side. So, but it's definitely the same vein. Just a love of the things that genre can do, but then finding how genre can be also just kind of gives itself to exploring all sorts of human things, deep human problematic things, the kind of things that bug me, the things that are either hurting me or, in the case of the Absolute Book, the things that were nourishing me and bringing me back to life after having a difficult period in my life. And then this book was my coming back to life book, that I wrote about someone who was damaged and half alive because of things that had happened to her, and was totally functional, not damaged as in disorderly damaged, which is quite a common thing to write a heroine who's disorderly damaged. That's kind of like a acceptable, self-expressive female character kind of thing. But I wanted to write someone who was highly functional, highly professional, very intelligent, very plausible, very scholarly, but had locked off a whole lot of bits of herself and her life because she just had both been hurt by things that happened and had then compounded the hurt by doing bad things, basically. Doing the wrong things.
Right. So I don't think it's too much of a scene of what do you call that thing? Spoiler alert. Oh no!
The opening line is her sister's murder, basically. Yeah. So you can certainly say that.
We'll get Elizabeth to do a reading, but shall I just give a bit of a scene setter because it might be easier for me. So Taryn is the central character. So she's grieving at her sister's really pointless death, and she sort of slides into revenge. And Jacob Berger is a detective who's set to uncover her crime, and Shift is an interesting character that we'll talk about later, who's set to save her. So a quest ensues it's crime and quest. It's all
arcane thriller. The kind of grab bag structure, if you want to kind of put all the things I wanted to put into the book, is of the kind of book where a scholarly hero looks for an arcane object like the Da Vinci Code. So
this is an object called the Fire Starter, which has survived many fires and takes them to many places in this world, in another world, and even to purgatory and hell.
Yeah, well, Shift's briefly in hell, very briefly, and then gets run out of town on a rail, basically.
So are you ready with a reading?
Yes, I have a longer reading and a shorter one. I think I'll do my longer one. It's from later in the book. And to set it up, Taryn is in Fairyland, in the Cid, which large amounts of the book take place there. She's been left behind on her way somewhere by Shift. Shift's been kind of looking after her in He really is looking after her, but she isn't quite satisfied with the quality of his care.
So the Sid is another world.
It's fairyland.
Yeah, it's fairyland. So I wasn't sure if it was pronounced Sid or she, as a banshee.
No, the people are pronounced she. So that's the Irish pronunciation, and the land is pronounced Sid, which is the Welsh pronunciation of the land. So I just thought, because they got similar spelling and they kind of went together with consistency. So I just thought Welsh Irish, because after all, I'm just presuming it's their word that the Welsh and Irish are using. I mean, it's the she's word for themselves. Yeah. So, yes, so she's there, and what do you need to know? They're on their way, they're partway through a journey to the moot, which takes place every 100 years, and just before the tithe, where fairyland has to pay its tithe in human souls to hell. And this terrible accounting happens, and she and various other people are on their way there. People, human beings, as well as fairies. So, yeah. Taryn shouldered Shift's bedroll as well as her own and went downriver. She found a stretch of water sheltered from the current by the landing and a shingle spit. The water was sparkling and several other people were swimming. Taryn took off her clothes and walked into the water, which was fresh but not cold. She swam and rinsed herself and sat in the shallows. She even had a conversation with a middle-aged man whose face was stippled by white scars. It looked as if someone had been chipping away at him with a chisel. He spoke in sparse, formal French, with more fluent dialect mixed into it, and a little English. Enough for Taryn to tell him that she came from London and was a writer of books, and for him to tell her that when he was last on earth he was a poilu, an infantryman, and before that a cobbler. He originally came from a village in Brittany. They managed that little, then sat companionably, the water hissing as it lapped against the thick mat of hair on his chest. She tried some of her she on him, and he taught her a little more, all of it related to the river, upstream and downstream, boat and sail, voyage and current. The sun left the water. Everyone got out and picked up their clothes and followed the sunlight higher up the water meadow. They stood and dried in the air. No midges or mosquitoes came to molest them. Taryn put on her sweaty garments and joined the soldier at his fire, where there were several more Frenchmen and 2 joyful Vietnamese teenagers who were making everyone pull their food for as much of a feast as they could muster. Taryn contributed her walnuts and fresh apricots. Someone came around with a crock full of a powerful juniper-flavoured clear spirit. The crock still had scabs of fresh earth on its sides, as someone had only just dug it up. It was clearly a piece of human provisioning, because none of the she at the fires near Taryn's accepted any. Everyone at her fire ate and drank and got a little inebriated. They sang for a bit and then tried to get Taryn to tell them, in her poor French, how the world fared. Was it possible yet to be poor and live decently? Were young men still sent to die in wars made by old men? Were the meek still waiting to inherit the earth as Scripture promised, though generations of them were already under the ground and a grave isn't an inheritance? Not really, Taryn said of the first. Yes, of course, of the second. And of the third, no, it's not like that. They made us believe we're weaklings if we can't do everything for ourselves, by ourselves. We all say, so I've failed, when mostly we've been failed. They made us afraid of one another, but of themselves they say, there is no they. Taryn's French didn't let her down. These were simple things to express. The people around the fire all looked at her sadly and nodded sagely. She stared at their human faces painted by the firelight and thought how those they loved and served would eventually sell them into perpetual misery. She wanted to tell them to run away. What Were they going to say of themselves when their souls were marched through Hell's Gate and their bodies were buried, no doubt with flowers and music and fine ceremony? Were they going to say, so I failed, such and such a lady or a gentleman no longer loves me and has laid me by? Taryn understood that her existence was only of use or not of use to her society. She was a consumer contributing to economic growth, which was an unquestioned good. To exist, she must spend her life spending. But these people were going to be sold to buy more time for time-rich, heartless people. They were going to be literally damned by association, never mind the original state of their souls. Heaven would not intervene as it did in Yeats's Countess Kathleen, because, for a start, none of these people was a countess. They were the numberless others of history, counted only by the tithe. They were marks in a ledger. Taryn wanted to say, I'm a consumer and a client, and you're property. We have value, but it has nothing to do with who we are. But she didn't say it, because what good would it do when a true understanding of what was in store for them couldn't save them from any of it?
So you've kind of, there's numerous themes I could draw out of that, but you've touched on our consumerism, and on there, I think later in the book, Taryn refers to the thing that she knew they were doing wrong, but their habit of living meant they just kept living with it.
Yes.
So do you think we're a bit like that in the way that we know the way we live as Westerners is not dealing with the environmental crisis, but we're too comfortable to just move on?
Yes, well, the book doesn't go there or conclude that. It's very strongly aimed at kind of bringing. It's a trick. It's a wish fulfillment. It's kind of a trick. It's a wish fulfillment fantasy about saving the world, in as much as there's intervention to save the world. But the point of that is not, to sidestep the issue, but to show people. I was kind of thinking of making people think, or thinking myself really, about what we wish for. And what we wish for is that somebody would take it out of our hands. When the government keeps giving us referendums on something, like they're giving us, a big gift by making us vote about something, when we've voted them in to make decisions for us. We want the whole disposable, non-renewable plastics to be dealt with. We want there to be legislation. We want governments to do these things for us. We don't want it to be put back constantly on the consumer. So my thing about the great intervention where choice is taken off people some of the agency is taken away in a benign way to say, okay, it is time, in this case, to intervene on behalf of the rest of the world, which is like the trees and the plants and the insects and the animals. The wish is not that we'd have it constantly put on us. I mean, I don't think consumers should have to save the world. That's saying that consumerist capitalism should save the world. Yeah.
You also mentioned, like the biblical reference to the meek shall inherit, and you've got quite an interesting view of who you call the great god of the deserts.
Oh yes, yeah.
What happened to him?
Well, the book's full of myths, but I guess it's mostly an animist book or a pagan book or an animist book, and that every river has a spirit or a god or everything in it. That's it. But it has all the gods are clearly real. Like it's a book in which you don't meet many gods, but you hear of them, and there are opinions had by some of them, of others of them, and they change shape all the time. The thing is about being godly is being easily influenced. So the great god of the deserts, the god from the void, etc., as they keep calling him, everyone, the sort of long run of titles that people get, honorifics when people are talking.
Like I interpreted that as he's the Judeo-Christian god.
Yeah, yes, but Judeo-Christian, but also obviously Islam also, because as I say, it's the great god, it's the same god, and the story is that god is unwell and sequestered because all that god's worship has had too many competing views of that god's nature, so that god went slightly mad. Yeah, so that's the story. And then there's a thing about how in it, Odin appears in the book like at least once and is mentioned several times. Actually, Odin appears at the Auckland Writers' Festival.
He does. So, yeah. You could recognise him by his ponytail.
Yeah. It is also going a little bit crazy, as they say, because having the wrong worshippers and to which the police officer character, but Jacob, who's one of the main characters, says very, very perspicaciously, you mean white supremacists with vault nuts tattooed on their man boobs? Yes.
So there's
pretty much says
you're drawing on Norse mythology and Celtic various mythologies, and I read that you soaked up mythology as a child from the Porirua Library.
Yes, yeah.
What is it that you think about those myths? There's something about their enduring that...
Oh God! I think it's really interesting when people are asked to judge myths as if they didn't receive them. It's like, myths and fairy tales, when you receive them as a child...
you weren't in a judging...
No. So whatever is important to you and feels like full of ideas and meaning to you, you get it very early. So I think all myths, legends and folklores are fabulously full of stuff, and that's why they've survived from wherever they come from. They just get passed on. But yeah, I do particularly like the fairy stories. Yeah.
So you weren't at Whitty's session yesterday, were you?
No.
Because he said he sees a future for rather Middle Earth, Māori Earth, and that we've got these marvellous myths that no one is really tapping into here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Would you think that would be something you would ever tap into, or would you leave that to
I have, but no one ever notices.
Well, I didn't notice, I'm sorry.
Well, Pamari, where the little girl, she gets buried and she pulls herself out from under the ground on tree roots. That's a Māori myth. There's people digging themselves out of the earth by following tree roots, which of course actually is a true story because it happened to me. But but I was aware of the Māori myth when I wrote that, so I sort of feel like, that's one. So I think there are others too.
So Taryn, as you've mentioned, attended the Auckland Writers' Festival. So she's written a sort of like a slow burner kind of book in a way, hasn't she?
Yeah, one of those non-fiction books about something that everyone takes to, like the book about cod or the book about salt. In her case, it's a book about the things that threaten libraries, ending up with library fires.
Right.
Her grandfather had a library, which had a library fire when she was 10 years old, so that kind of started her off thinking about library fires.
So it enables you to write about the value of libraries.
Yes.
That then, that the phone is not the same thing, is it? There's random items in libraries like letters and, saved archival material. And
yes, well, the book does kind of have a sliding scale in that it blends the relationship between public libraries and collector libraries. Like, they're both incredibly valuable. That, the things that are kept that have value because history's attached itself to them, the collectors' libraries, and then the public libraries, which are also centres of community. And the argument that Taryn makes about libraries constantly is that today can't know what tomorrow will need, and that's why libraries are important. But living in a city without a central library I know how important libraries are. I mean, Wellington just has got its heart missing at the moment because its central library is closed.
So I just looked up that what you have paraphrased there, but what Taryn's saying here is people to care, for there to be libraries in the future, what would be required? People to care about the transmission of knowledge from generation to generation and about keeping what isn't immediately necessary because it might be vital one day or simply intriguing or beautiful.
Yes, that's right. And then so the question keeps being pushed, what do you need then? You need civilization and so on, and what do you need if you need civilization? Yeah, and then they get to the the floods and and what say all your houses fall into the sea? What say all your
Yeah, well, I was just thinking. Yeah. Elizabeth and I were talking about our gardens before we came up on stage, and she was saying, "Oh no, it was Kerry, I think, was saying that Renee said this morning how important growing vegetables is going to be in the future, or maybe we were all saying that. So maybe it's your old faded Yates gardening guide you need to be looking after."
Well, by the end of the book, there are people passing out seeds and gardening advice in libraries. Yeah. It's something that's happening.
So you've there's a lot of research gone into the information about libraries and book burning, and Taryn tells her audience at the Auckland Writers' Festival about Hulugu Khan, if I said that correctly.
Hulugu Khan.
Hulugu Khan. William Wallace, William Wallace and the library at Iona, the libraries of Buda and Pesh, the casualties of aerial bombing in World War II, and there's even a bear who ate a vellum book. So what I was going to say to you don't just go Google destruction of libraries and find this stuff. How did you do all this?
Well, in the acknowledgements of the book, there's sort of like the key text. So Polistron's. God, I've got to get his first name. He's got a really exciting name, this fellow. What is his exciting name? No, that's 2 pages of acknowledgements. Oh, yes. Okay. Lucian X. Polistron's Books on Fire. That was the main book, and then Stuart Kells is the library.
So how did you find Books on Fire?
Oh, look, let's see. I went into the university library and I was looking at books about libraries in the university library, and I just picked up Books on Fire, and that was so early on. I had this vague notion that library fires were coming into the book. And then by the time I finished reading Books on Fire and bought my own copy, I was like, yep, I know where I'm going with this. Yeah.
Oh, that must have been a great find. And what about the bear that ate the vellum book?
Yeah, well, that was I found that in Books on Fire. So yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the bear that ate. Yes, it was a
he
copy
had a hunger that burnt.
Yeah, it was a very cold winter, and it was one of the few copies of the letters of St. Jerome. The bear broke into the monastery and ate St. Jerome's letters. Yeah, because they were on vellum, which is calf or lamb skin. Yeah.
So what about the book title, Elizabeth? The Absolute Book. What? And you reference some sort of absolute books in the book, I think, too, don't you?
Yes.
So what's meant by that?
Geez. Well, there's so many things meant by that, but in the end, it's the world. Is that the planet's the absolute book? So yeah, it was. I was kind of the book goes. It goes where it goes. So yeah, it just kind of goes out to the last thing that all our knowledge and understanding is dependent upon, i.e. the world, the planet. But also it's because it's an arcane thriller, the thing that is being looked for, and this is where I can't give the spoiler, and this is probably the main plot reason it's called the Absolute Book, is a thing that might be called an absolute book. Yes, that's all I can really say. Everybody in the book is. What happens is Taryn is having a hard time in her life because the things that she's pushed to one side are crashing down upon her. But she begins the main part of the book. By chapter 3 is sort of like the continuous. You get the backstory of the murder and the revenge she takes, and then it continues with what happens because of all that. She's losing time, and she's finding that she's eating raw food out of her refrigerator, and sometimes she sort of surfaces inside herself and finds that as if someone else is asking somebody she knows really well, like her father, questions using her voice, and always asking questions about the fire in her grandfather's library. And it all goes back to her book, which is called The Feverish Library, and there's a footnote in the book which mentions this thing called the fire starter, which used to be in the British Museum and which survived fires in numerous libraries throughout history. And it was removed from the British Museum during World War II to protect, as one of the treasures, to protect it, and left in some caves near the Welsh border, as things were stored in dry cave systems. I mean, this is sort of, all based on sort of real things that the British Museum did during World War II. And her grandfather was responsible for that because the caves were on his land. So, and then, the British Museum forgot about the fire starter because everybody forgets about it. It ended up in his library. He forgot about it. Somebody set fire to his library and seemed to be talking about it, but didn't seem to know themselves. And so it goes on. And as it turns out, there are demons looking for this thing called the fire starter. No one knows why. And then because the demons are looking for it, and because it's very near to the time where the tithe from Fairyland happens, and they have to handle all the taken people over to hell again, or half of them or most of them. And they're getting very, very tired of that and feeling consumed by guilt, the fairy people, although they keep doing it anyway because they want to keep on living because they like that. So they start trying to find this fire starter because they think it might, the demons are looking for it. Maybe something could be done. And that's sort of the way the book runs, which is only giving away like a little bit of it. But yeah, that's why the absolute book, because the fire starter has possibly something absolute bookish about it. But yeah. But whether or not human beings can actually talk about it and then remember 2 seconds later the thing that they just realised is another matter, because the book is full of things that are being hidden in plain sight. Yeah.
It's got many levels.
It's a naughty arcane thriller fantasy mystery thing.
I love this arcane thriller. I'd never heard of that before.
Well, that's what you call like those Kate Moss books, they're like Labyrinth or the Da Vinci Code or...
This is not in the same league as the Da Vinci Code. It's way more...
It's
literary.
Well, yes, but what I do is I don't just do like... I do subgenres. So I go like, yes, I've written a vampire book. I've written a kind of a Billy's Kiss is a formal mystery book. So that's not really, that's a genre, not a subgenre. But yeah, but I'd love to write a cowboy book. I'd love to write a space opera. Yeah, I've written sort of a monster horror book, and I would like to write a ghost story horror book. So yeah.
I was going to ask you at the end what you're working on, and I will. I'll leave that in the meantime. But we've talked about libraries, and another recurrent theme is sisterhood. So there's Odin's ravens.
Yeah, who are sisters, not brothers.
You say their names.
Moonin and Hugin and Moonin.
Hugin and Moonin. And so Neve, one of the fairy people, has a relationship with Shift, driven by her obligation to her sister. There's obviously Taryn and her sister Bee. You say, I thought this was lovely, Taryn and Bee were plaited closely. Mm-hmm. And you've have written before about your relationships with your own sisters. Mm. You see it as quite a particular relationship.
I'm very close to my younger sister. She's one of the main people of my life. So I wanted to write about sisters, and in this book it's driven by the dead sister, so the Bee having been killed, and then Adan, who's Shift's mother, so Nev's Adan's sister, and that sort of relationship is a very vexed relationship. Nev's relationship with her nephew. and her grief for her sister, which goes on and on. And then there's Hugan and Moonin, who I wrote as sisters.
The ravens.
Yeah, the ravens, the female ravens, because as someone says, any wise god will have female advisors. So, yeah, so Odin's ravens are.
So what were you really wanting to say about sisterhood?
It's indelible. That's really it. That's it. This is, yeah. There are actually statistics about survival. People live longer if they have a sister.
I've got mine in the audience.
Sisters live long. Females live longer with a sister, and males do too. So yeah,
That's
anyone
really
who has a
interesting.
sister is It's one of the many predictors of living longer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really interesting thing, because
So-
compared with your spouse, there's no one else you can talk to about your parents in the
No.
way that you can talk to your sister about early childhood or parental influences or any of that kind of stuff.
Yes, and sisters seem to both have no patience for your nonsense and have more patience for your nonsense simultaneously.
This isn't particularly connected. I've got questions all over the shop, really, but I really loved your description of purgatory. It reminded me of those somewhat tense, anxious dreams where you're trying to find a room and you think you're on track for it, but when you get there, it's empty. Mm-hmm.
That's purgatory is where you can't get your paperwork sorted out. When you go
the
to
trains don't run on time.
The trains don't run on time. You go to get your forms, and nobody has friends, and nobody can expect anyone to do anyone else a favour. But they're always looking for opportunities to do other people favours, and then failing to do it. It's just my version of purgatory, which is purgatorial in a, just like a endless, incredibly frustrating day in a kind of a half-lit place with dim light and no beauty. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a giant waiting room, which is, I think that's what other people have alluded, described purgatory in other contexts, but it has that unique sort of sense of frustration about it that you've created. It's
Yeah, they
fantastic.
get the Taryn and Shift go to purgatory to find something. To get some information. It's kind of like a risky thing to do. I will leave my body behind. I hope it will be looked after while I'm not in it. Yeah.
Do you see, I'm not sure if you've talked about this already, I don't think you quite have. Do you see one of the appeals of fantasy to the writer is the opportunity it provides to examine what is human? Like the humans in this book, what makes them different from the she?
Yes, it is. And but that's kind of offset in the book by Shift, who's a shapeshifter, by his insistence that every being is people. So everything's people. His hens are people. The demons are people. They're not very appetising people, but he regards them as people, and trees are people. Yeah. So that was kind of also my reflection upon fiction, that when you meet fiction and you have beings with agency in it, they just represent the sort of spectrum of humanity. Because if you sort of take out the everyday, we take out the times we live in, which we accept as a reality, whereas the older we are, the more we're aware of the fact that that if your teenagers, if your teenage grandchildren or children look at you in a peculiar way, if you talk about how rubbishman used to come to the door or to pick up the rubbish, or how milk was delivered door to door, and everybody says, oh, you can't go back there, because even my younger sister said to me, oh, we couldn't do that again about milk deliveries because Wellington's so much bigger now than it was back when there were milk deliveries. And you go, but there were door-to-door milk deliveries in London, And you go, yeah, you start realising that every time that you're writing fiction with really radically different points of view in it, anyone who lives a long life can see how radically reality moves, and that's just within the span of a human life. So... Yeah.
Or looking at your my granddaughter who's here, she and I watched Jane Eyre the other night, and she was going, "They're weird. Why are they so weird? Why do they talk like that?" But I said to her, the past is a foreign country, and look at that picture on the wall. That's my grandma dressed in the same clothes as those, almost
Yep, that's right.
Jane Eyre people on screen. And it's only that far away from you and I.
Yeah, but of course they are also speaking Bronte speak, which is things like literary stylings, yes.
So while we're talking about fantasy and young people, I'm not sure where I read this, maybe on Stuff. You were saying you wanted to write a book that made its readers happy, not simply diverted by the story, but to come out the other side feeling better in some appreciable way, which is fantastic. But a lot of fiction that young people, YA fiction, fantasy that they're immersing themselves in, is quite dark. Dystopian future, do you think there's a danger
this is an
in that?
adult book, so I thought that the adult fantasy audience would appreciate reading a book that made them happy. And, it does, I am getting reports that this book makes people happy. So
yeah, it's great. Just with YA,
but with
dystopian.
Well, I don't know. I always think there's sort of this great dystopian fiction, but then there's sort of stacked dystopian fiction, the ones where they sort of like, if they kept doing their world building and asking questions of their questions, they kind of back themselves into a corner and realise that no, it wouldn't work like that. I mean, I'm quite fussy about that stuff, but. We're living in a dystopia at the moment, so whether or not dystopian fiction has prepared any of the young people who were reading it over the past 10 years for the world that we're living in, and the world, where facts sort of don't matter in the same way that they used to, or appear not to, or the world that's coming. I don't know. I don't know whether it just makes everything seem controllable. But then the message of the dystopian YA books is that the young people have to save the world because it's been run badly. So maybe that is actually a good message.
Good answer. Thank you. So just while we're talking about contemporary society, you actually allude to Brexit in your arcane thriller, and have Jacob, who's the detective, he quotes a friend who says Brexit wasn't just motivated by a nostalgic wish to turn back the clock to Grandpa's time, but it was almost a mythical yearning for the past,
Yeah, as he said, the line continues as if someone's going to pull a sword from a stone kind of thing. It doesn't say it that way.
Stone,
which of course
I've just read
happening.
Ghost Wall, which is reenactors, and apparently there's a real boom in that in the UK of people reenacting Iron Age lifestyles. Yes,
that's really interesting because the Ghost Wall's sort of set in the 80s, isn't it? And the reenacting father, the terrible father, he's got some kind of developmental disorder type personality problem, so it's not very pro the reenacting, is it?
No, it's not pro the reenacting. But do you think there is, as our times get more dystopian, and there's this sort of nostalgic thing, and it's not just for making your own bread and all that sort of thing. Do you think that there's more interest in mythology?
Oh, yes, I do, and I think this is sort of, it's not the kind of alternative lifestyle as things. It's the actual real, authentic and important movements like the British rewilding movement. If anyone reads Robert Macfarlane, the British writer, anybody who's talking about learning how the world is supposed to operate, and in New Zealand terms, when people start talking about building seawalls and you sort of clap your hand to your forehead because you go like, you don't want to build seawalls, you want to restore the swampland because the swampland's what protects us from the sea. So that's that kind of movement where you look back to old land use in places which have been highly cultivated for centuries and centuries and centuries, like Britain. That's kind of, it's not just romantic. It is romantic, but it's also practical because there's a lot to be learned. Apparently beavers are really good for flood control. Like everywhere they put them back, they're one of the great things that really work with flood control.
I've seen that on a series about Yosemite National Park.
So we can't have them here.
They'd do something bad if we got them
we've
here.
got to have swamps.
Could Wickers build dams?
Yeah, swamps.
I just wanted to ask you about writers' festivals because you've got Taryn coming to New Zealand too.
I've got bad questions at writers' festivals. I wanted to do a scene where the people get up and they do the I haven't read your book, but it seems to me what you're saying is.
Oh, right.
that kind of question, and then they have a statement. So yeah, I wanted to.
Oh well, there you go. None of those questions, please. I'm sure you wouldn't anyway. I just wanted to ask you about, that it's quite a thing where even in your time as a writer, writers have kind of come out of the garret, and now you're on a celebrity circuit, really, where you've going to one festival and then to another. I was interested recently reading in the Listener, Carl Stead made some sort of reference to how Janet Frame would have fared in today's world of book marketing. Do you think it's an essential part now of being a writer? How do you view it?
Yeah, okay, so it is an absolutely essential part of being a writer. Writers' festivals have become a place to talk about ideas too, which is important because we don't have the town hall talks anymore. We don't have people coming along to discuss the issues of the day, and honestly, I think we need them again. So writers' festivals fill some of that, which is really important. For a writer, they're great. They're really good. For writers who are shy and retiring and, lose several layers of skin, as Janet Frame would have, I think they're quite difficult. I like audiences. I like to talk to people who read my books. I find it nerve-wracking. I always want to make people laugh, but then I also want to kind of say something serious too, so it's a bit of a balancing act. I do feel for the beginning writers who haven't figured out how to be themselves. And then there are other people who have wisely told me when I was younger, or wisely tell me now that they have a performing self, or they have a public self, and then they have their private self, so that they can protect their private self by presenting their public self. And I've always gone, where do you find that? Public, who is that person? It's like, because there's just me. That's it. I mean, the person you see on stage is the person that my poor family gets in the kitchen. So, yeah, exactly the same with the declaiming. Yeah.
It's nearly time to
ask those questions that aren't statements.
So I've got a couple of other things to ask you. Right, but it'll cut out your second reading. Is that all right?
No, I don't need to do my second reading.
Okay. So you alluded to this already, that you were going through quite a difficult time. I think last time you were here at the festival,
yes.
Your mother wasn't well. She developed motor neurone.
She had motor neurone disease.
Yep. And the Vintner's Luck had come out as a movie, and that was a bad time for you.
I'm writing about all that, so I don't talk about it anymore.
No, and you'd had a death, Fergus's brother.
Fergus's brother was killed in Rarotonga by a drunken driver, but it wasn't really that. It was on purpose. He was tried for manslaughter and went to prison.
So that's almost parallel.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it is.
So what I was going to ask you, was it like a place, I found it was like a place to go as a reader. It was like a holiday reading this book.
Yeah.
So for you, was it a place to go?
No, because I didn't write that during that time. I wrote Wake, which is about needing to look after people and failing to look after them. So Wake's very strongly written out of that experience. And Mortal Fire too, though it's a sort of not a dark book like Wake. It's kind of like tear-stained but bright as Mortal Fire. But they directly came out of, I wrote them during that period. This book was written recovering from that period, which is why it's also a recovery narrative, that Taryn basically comes back to life. She learns who she is, she learns what she's for, she learns what use the world has for her, what use she has for herself, and just how to live a decent and reasonable life, and a happy life, because to get onto to find a use for yourself and to live a decent and reasonable life is, the road to get on to live a happy life. If you just try and get onto the happy life, you're never going to get there. You've got sort of the intermediate stages. So that's what it's a recovery narrative. Yeah.
And it helped you with your
recovery? Yeah, no, but mostly I hadn't realised till I'd finished it that it was a recovery narrative. To me, what I was writing was this marvellous sort of transcends it, kind of an involving, sort of mysterious, thrilling book with kind of crazy things going on in it that kind of just threw the reader around, but that where nothing ever got lost in it, whereas characters you thought were in that part of the book suddenly turned up in that. So it just it kind of comes round and comes round and comes round without repetition, Just changes it. Everything shifts, like the character shifts. Yeah.
Shall we see if there's any questions from the floor? Maybe while someone puts their hand up and Kerry finds the microphone, you could just tell us that question about what you're working on at the moment.
I'm finishing my memoir, which is called Nightmare, which was our sign-off, my sign-off to my mother in text, because of course she wasn't speaking. So everything was written by hand or in texts because she couldn't speak anymore. So Nightmare. And
but you write by hand too?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I write by hand. And then I dictate onto voice recognition software. I love writing by hand with pencil and paper because it means you can lie down and write. And until very recently, I had 3 needy elderly cats who insisted on being wherever I was, and 3 cats take up a lot of space, so there's a lot of lying on the bed writing by hand with pencil, because pens you can't write sideways with them, and with cats, pens, paper. So
and it's
everything goes back to the body, but not necessarily one's own. There are always cats involved, except not now because they're gone.
So writing by hand, does that make your creative work quite different from banging out an email about
there's articles that you can go online and read about the difference between handwriting for thinking and keyboards. Yeah, apparently there's a difference. But yeah, I don't remember exactly the details.
I hope someone's going to put their hand up, because this happened to me at the last festival I was at, and I think I'm freaking people out or something.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I have read your book and I enjoyed it immensely.
Just close the gap with the microphone.
Looking at more. So my question is, if you're writing by hand, do you leave gaps between your sentences, or gaps, or do you just write in a solid block?
I write in a solid block. I'm sort of, because I don't like to carry around lots of paper, I tend to squish up my books. And I end up with, like, if I run out of, I'm sitting somewhere and I can't get a fresh one, so I kind of end up writing round the margins, and like I'm writing Victorian letters where they used to cross, they cross the lines. You'd have the cross hatch writing to save paper. So yeah, nobody can read them, but the Beagle Hole room is collecting my papers, which are mostly handwritten. So some poor researcher in the future, if anyone's interested, is going to be going, "Oh, fuck you, Elizabeth Knox."
So then my second question from that would be, there's so many threads in this book. How do you keep track of them all if you're writing them by hand?
Right, okay, so I'll answer this question. I have a learning disability which I didn't understand the nature of when I was a child, and no one did. I was a really advanced reader, but I couldn't write to save myself, so everyone thought I was lazy. Really lazy and naughty, badly behaved. And this went on and on till I started writing for myself. So I get up in writers' festivals later and describe myself as a dyslexic. And then I was describing what form this took. And there was a retired special education teacher in one of my audiences, and he said, that's not dyslexia, that's dysgraphia. So I had dysgraphia, which means that I had to constantly exercise my memory my entire life, by just a normal life because of the disability, but also playing imaginary games which were entirely oral. So I can hold everything in my head. I imagine at some point my books will get very small, and when my brain goes, my books will get small and really pithy. Yeah, I promise. Eventually. Yeah.
So it seems like a good point to ask you a question, unless people are waving their hands around frantically. Anna Smale said at the launch of your book in Wellington, I'll just read this out. Recognising a gift for writing in this case is a bit like falling in love with the right person at the right time. There's luck there and fate and happenstance. There's the wonder of infatuation, and then, if you're really lucky, there's a deepening and strengthening as gift meets vocation. The electrical charge of realising that this thing, whatever it is not going to run out. Would you see your gift for writing like that?
Oh, you mean like, are the stories going to run out?
No,
God,
I just mean this gift that you've got, like this memory where you can hold everything that you talked about Taryn as finding her usefulness, that you have a gift, an undoubted gift of creating a story, drawing in. I
feel very lucky to have been able to do what I do, and very lucky to have thought of doing it. And yes, I do think that the way that my mind works is suited to it, but I don't think it's solely suited to that. I think there are probably a number of other things I might have done with my life that would have been equally as useful, but not. I wouldn't have been able to spend all day in my pyjamas, so there's that.
We have a question out here, Kerry. Thank you. I've just had a dog that died, so I'm not going to ask you if you're getting any more cats. It's probably too soon. Question?
Well, I dread saying this, but I haven't read your book yet. Not yet, but I'm halfway through an older series by a male author, Robert Jordan, and my inner feminist is screaming. I almost want to throw the book across the room because it's a little bit dated and it's driving me insane. So I'm wondering to what extent that you consider yourself a feminist.
Oh, I am a feminist, yes.
And the relationship between...
There's no extent there. I'm a feminist. That's it.
And I'm interested in the conventions of fantasy writing and all those tropes and things that go with it, and how you negotiate that in your writing. Oh,
right. Okay, so what happens is I write literary fantasy, and what happens either is two things happen. Four, if you want to sort of do it from every angle. Literary fiction, some people say I'm not doing the proper literary fiction because it's got fantasy, right? And so some fantasy writers think that I get the tropes wrong, whereas I actually just am doing what I'm doing with the damn tropes. It's like, you don't shape yourself to the tropes, you shape the tropes to what you want to do. That's the way I see it. But then on the other hand, that's the downside. On the other side of that, there's the fantasy writers who go, yeah, see, look, you can shape the tropes to do what you want. And there's the literary fiction writers who go, ooh, I've always wanted to put a ghost in something. So, it's just the encouragements and discouragements. But I'm very aware of the fact that I'm kind of walking a middle line when it comes to tone or depth or something like that. That I'm writing non-realist literary fiction, and what I'm trying to do is write literature. I'm trying to write literature. I've always been trying, and anyone's quite free to say, "Oh, sorry, you've failed," But
you sure haven't.
But I've been trying. So yeah, that was my aspiration for reasons of fear of death. I used to think when I was young that if I could only make something that lasted, I would be less afraid of dying. But now I'm afraid of the whole world dying. So
that's a wee bit
what the hell's the point?
Well, reading is always important, and we recognise that in this room. So
it's a comfort.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. Thank you to Kerry for organising this, Paige and Blackmore for being here. Elizabeth will be down here to sign books. Thanks to Yanya for sorting us out with our sound and making us take our earrings off. And a huge thank you, most of all, to Elizabeth. So thanks. That was great. And do buy it, you won't regret it.
I was just going to say that I just held the reprint in my hand, so the book has already been reprinted, and it was the #1 on the New Zealand fiction bestseller list on Newsroom this week. So let's keep it there. Woo! You're listening to the 2019 Nelson Arts Festival Page and Blackmore Pukapuka Talks.